resources are anything that is found in nature and is of use to you either directly or indirectly. Now in natural resources, the first thing that you need to do is to understand what the natural resource is. Once you have understood what the natural resource is, you must be able to identify the uses that the natural resources offer to you. Once you have identified the nature and the uses that natural resources provide to you, you then need to understand what happens if there is an overexploitation of these natural resources. Once you have understood the consequences, the effects of overexploitation of any natural resource, it is time to move on to the conservation of the natural resource. So these are the basic concepts that you will have to master in every single natural resource. Now how many natural resources are there in your chapter? There are 6 natural resources and you can remember them easily with the sentence, finally finished with my environmental lesson. Now that stands for forest resource, food resource, water resource, mineral resource, energy resource and land resources. Forest resources, you have the uses of forest resources, which are majorly 2 in nature. They are the commercial uses and the ecological uses. Under commercial use, we should mention the major commercial uses of forest resources, namely timber extraction or extraction of medicines from the forest. And under ecological resources, you must be able to mention the major ecological uses that you have in the forest, namely maybe for example say production of rainfall and the production of or the prevention of soil erosion. So those are the things that you will have to mention under the uses of forest resources. Overexploitation of forest resources, which includes the cutting away or clearing away of large areas of forests. This process is called deforestation and this is a very important keyword in your chapter. Now deforestation will lead to land erosion and a variety of other factors, including the loss of habitat, soil erosion, and finally this deforestation will lead to land degradation. And once the land completely degrades, it results in the complete loss of soil fertility. The rainfall does not stay where it is supposed to stay and you will have a general loss of vegetation, and finally the land becomes a desert, and this entire process is called as desertification. So deforestation, degradation and desertification, the 3 Ds are very very important in this chapter, and these can be used as a common consequence for all the natural resources. Water resources, you will have to mention about the major types of water resources which are present in the planet, namely the fresh water and the salt water resources. The most important part of water resources that you will have to memorize or to remember is the kind of overexploitation of water resources that is going on, how water is being extracted from the ground and from the surface for various human activities. You will also have to mention in particular about the consequences of building dams. Now remember that when you build dams, you affect all the natural resources together. But when you mention dams, particularly for water resources, you will be mentioning them as the consequences of dam construction on the environment or on water resources, particularly in 2 different areas, the upstream area and the downstream area. And when you answer the same question in the forest resource, you will have to mention about the consequences of the construction of dams on tribal people. So consequences of dams on the environment, on tribal people, on forest resource, on water resource, on land resource are all very important, and you will need to organize them in proper order. Food resources. Now food resources, there are 2 very important concepts, undernutrition and malnutrition. Undernutrition is when the person receives less than the recommended amount of calories in his or her food, and malnutrition is when the person receives the amount of nutrition but does not receive the nutrition in the right concentration of nutrients. Now nutrients means vitamins, minerals and other micro and macro nutrients which are essential to be included in the food. Then in food resources you have world food problems, issues of food shortage, etc., which you can briefly look into. Under mineral resources, you will have to understand the classification of minerals, and particularly you will have to remember the environmental consequences of mining activities. Now mining activities, you will have to concentrate on both mining activities that are done above surface, open pit mining, open cast mining, and you will have to remember the consequences of subsurface mining and underground mining also. And what are the consequences of mining? One of the major consequences of mining is the creation of acid mine drainage. And mining activities will affect all the other interconnected natural resources as well. For example, mining activities will also result in deforestation. Mining activities also result in degradation, and mining activities also result in desertification. Energy resources. Under energy resources, you must remember that all the energy resources that are available to man are available in two forms, renewable and non-renewable. Now you will have to mention about the different types of renewable and non-renewable energy sources. The renewable energy sources you can mention about solar energy and wind energy. Under non-renewable, you will have to mention about the energy resources that are available from fossil fuels. You will have to mention the benefits and advantages and the disadvantages and the problems in using each and every kind of renewable and non-renewable energy resources. And please remember that biogas is a very important renewable energy resource, or it is part of bioenergy that has been newly introduced. Under land resources you will have to mention about the different consequences of misuse or overexploitation of land for other purposes. You can mention all the consequences of environmentally degrading activities on the land, practiced on the land. Even agriculture, modern agriculture is an activity which can degrade the land resources to a significant amount. Now in all the natural resources you will have to mention about the conservation of each and every land resource. For example, under conservation of forest resource, you will have to mention about afforestation programs. In water resource, you will have to mention about water conservation practices. In mineral resource, you will have to mention about how do you reforest a mined area or how do you reclaim a mined area. Under land resource, you will have to mention about soil conservation and soil reclamation practices. And these are the major things that you will have to remember under this chapter, which is natural resource. And do not forget that there are 6 natural resources. Do not get confused between them, and you can use the 3 Ds for all of these, which is deforestation, degradation and desertification. Now there is one more which is called as overgrazing. Overgrazing means the consumption of vegetation and the destruction of vegetation by grazing animals at a rate which is faster than they can regenerate. So when the animals, they trample on the ground in large numbers, they destroy the vegetation, they alter the landscape, and they create what is called as soil compaction, due to which the water will not percolate deep into the soil. Eventually the land will degrade and turn into a desert. So deforestation, desert degradation and desertification are the 3 most important things that you will have to remember in this chapter on natural resources. Thank you.